You're watching College Sports Rush's Sports Bettor's Paradise on the Bet Rivers Network.
All right, we started out with 68, 64, and after 48 games Thursday through Sunday, we are down to 16. Let's get right into the Sweet 16 matchups. Winning week for us in the first full weekend. Not as much of a... Some people wondering if Cinderella is facing extinction with all of the major programs dipping down and getting rating the mid-majors for their stronger players. So is the case this week. In the SEC with 7 of the 16 remaining. Let's start with the SEC and talk about points, offense, pace of play. You got it with Alabama and BYU. Bama, the highest scoring team in the country, and boy, got all they could handle against Robert Morris. Robert Morris really was not fazed, the regular season champion and also the tournament champion from their league, and gave Bama all they could want. And one of the most intriguing matchups I could think of was the highest scoring team in the country in Alabama against the slowest team maybe in the country, or one of them, in St. Mary's. I think Mark Few, longtime coach at Gonzaga, put it best. We've been trying to speed up St. Mary's for 25 years. You can't do it. And it really wasn't a problem at all for Alabama, including Sears with a couple of fouls who sat the bench for a big part of the first half. And Bama handled this battle of pace, which I thought was going to be a real headache for them, much more easily than I anticipated. The line's been teetering between 4.5 and 5 right now. It currently at Bet Rivers, it's 4.5 and 174.5 because they're going to get out of the BYU. They were impressive against Wisconsin and have been. They finished the minus the getting housed pretty good by Houston in the semifinals of the Big 12 tournament. They've really had the last month has been really good. And Wisconsin, who's such a tough out, was more of a, I know it came down to a possession for Wisconsin to try and tie it with a 2 late, and it also erased Tanji, the Colorado State transfer, a real effort by him. But BYU and Bama, points galore. Paul, I just like Bama. I like Bama here. There's no surprise that they're here in the Sweet 16. They were in the Final Four last year. Now, Nate Oates has won 6 games in the last 2 years in this tournament. And so kind of a team that expects to be here, maybe a team a little surprised to be here, especially considering they had to replace their coach, Mark Pope, who went on to Kentucky and didn't hire from within, but they hired from the NBA. But, boy, they sure do look like they run the same stuff that they did last year, Kentucky and BYU. I like the experience in the tournament a little bit more in this second weekend. I'm going to lay the 4.5 with Bama.
Yeah, Alabama certainly has the clear advantage in terms of athleticism, Jimmy, no question about it. But BYU, they're going to put up a good fight. They've been one of the better teams in all of college basketball, I think, the past month and a half. They've won 11 of their past 12 games during this current streak. BYU, they have won at Arizona, and they've defeated Iowa State twice in a 9-day span, both times coming away from their home court. I don't want to fade Alabama either, though. I think the fact that you're laying the points with Alabama gets a little bit of credibility, if you will, with the high total, because there's going to be a lot of points. There's going to be a lot of possessions. It's not going to be a slow down game with the total in the 120s or 130s. This is going to be a fast paced game where the winner certainly might win by 5 or more. I'm ultimately probably going to be more interested in the total personally. Don't have on a play on it yet. And I'm normally not one to bet over on high totals. I just don't like doing it. I've been burned too many times. But since January 18th, with the total closing in the 170s, Alabama is 6-1 to the over. So they just can't make the totals high enough when Alabama plays another team that wants to play up tempo. BYU certainly wants to play up tempo. They average over 80 points a game on the season. Over the last 10 games, BYU averaged 84.5 points a game. They make 10.6 3-pointers a game to rank in the top 10 nationally, hit 37% from 3-point range. So I think there's going to be a lot of points, and I'm kind of leaning towards the over right now despite the high total.
All right. So they went over against Robert Morris, did not, as St. Mary's allowed both teams empty their bench in the final minute. But the St. Mary's allowed, just so They elected not to foul and have that parade to the free throw line at the end of the game. So that thing snuck under at 146. It closed at 150. Who said the SEC is dominating the Sweet 16? We got a Southwest Conference matchup in this one. Arkansas catching 5.5 against Texas Tech. Both teams, this is out in San Francisco. Boy, how about the teams they ship it out to San Francisco? Maryland, Florida, Arkansas, and Texas Tech. McMillan did not play in the opening weekend. He and Williams, who have been in and out of the lineup, they sat those two in the loss to Arizona in the Big 12 tournament. Williams did return. And in Texas Tech, took care of business pretty workmanlike. Not a whole lot of scares in that one. Arkansas is the only double-digit seed alive in this tournament. But so let's not exactly make them out to be a real Cinderella story. Well, we talk about the SEC's got a lot of teams, and why is that? Because the SEC has bigger budgets, and their player payroll is NIL. Some player payroll in college somehow has gotten termed NIL. It's totally different. Arkansas has the highest player payroll in the conference. So no surprise there. And then you got Boogie Fland came back, but his impact was minimal. Thiero was still on the bench in the win against St. John's on Saturday, up in Providence. He might be back for this one this week. He did not dress out in the opening week of this tournament. So, but Arkansas here against Texas Tech, catching 5.5. And it was, I guess, routine. I guess the margin of victory. Where St. John's, this margin of victory eclipsed all of their combined margin victory for the entire season, margin of defeat rather, for the entire season. So it was how handily, maybe, for lack of a better term, that Arkansas took care of St. John's. Paul, you're looking at the Hogs here, catching 5.5.
Yeah, I tell you, I know, Jimmy, there are conflicting opinions in the college basketball world on whether John Calipari is a top game day tactician. But man, it's difficult not to be impressed with the job he's done in his first season there at the University of Arkansas at age 66. Just been a great, one of his better pieces of work, I think, as a head coach. His team, as we've talked about on this podcast, his team down the stretch was forced to play without its top two scorers, guys that you mentioned, Boogie Fland and Adu Thiero, but they found a way still to do just enough down the stretch to earn a spot in the tournament field. And as you mentioned also, after a 2-month absence due to a thumb injury, Boogie Fland, the true freshman from the Bronx, he returned for the Razorbacks. Their opening 2 games of the tournament, played just over 20 minutes, I believe, in both. His impact, although not significant statistically, I think was felt by the Razorbacks. I think he'll even be better and used more in the Sweet 16. Thiero, the 6'8" junior forward, he leads the Hogs in scoring at 15.6 points per game and rebounding at 6 a game. He last played on February 22nd due to a knee injury. I know they were acting like, he may play. He's going to try to play. I'm going to see him when I see him. I think this might be one of those kind of smoke and mirrors deal where Adu Thiero might actually be finished for the season. It would be great for Arkansas in college basketball if he was able to return this weekend. And it certainly remains unclear when and if he'll return to the hardwood. Still, Arkansas, again, they've played their best basketball of the season over the past month. Again, mostly without Fland and Thiero. They have especially thrived, has Arkansas in the role of the underdog. They are 8-2 against the spread as the betting underdog since February 1st. And that includes, of course, outright tournament victories this past week in the tournament against Kansas and St. John's. And then you look at the other side here. I think Grant McCasland, first of all, their head coach, he is a rising star in college basketball's coaching ranks. I think he's a really good coach. And then JT Toppin, the transfer from New Mexico, the Big 12 Player of the Year, might be the most unsung star in all of college basketball. The college basketball world might get to know Mr. Toppin here in the coming weeks. But I just love this Arkansas team's just grit and determination. They're playing with an edge. They're playing with a purpose, whatever intangible or adjective you want to use to describe it. I just like their look, the look in their eye and the look in their play. I like Arkansas plus 5.5 to keep it close versus the Red Raiders.
Keep in mind, Arkansas, that last week of the regular season, they were a noon Eastern tip-off hosting Mississippi State, and it was back and forth. It was up-tempo game. Mississippi State, down one, had two shots within 6 feet, about 6-footer and a 5-footer that just missed, or Arkansas might not even be in this tournament right now. That was 4 of 5. That made it 4 of 5 victories to close out the regular season. They split 1-1 in the SEC tournament, held on to beat South Carolina by 4, and then lost in a buzzer beater to Ole Miss in Purdue to close out their resume. But they were one of the last teams in, without a doubt. And how about that? And that was they were making up so much hype about Arkansas and Calipari going back to Rupp Arena. Man, that's a terrible game. They go in there and completely turn their season around. That was the start of something good for the Arkansas Razorbacks. Now they're in the Sweet 16. And Musselman, the previous coach, they were kind of a surprise team multiple times to get this far into the Sweet 16 as well. So Arkansas getting it done in the postseason. Let's continue on. Florida and Maryland. And, Paul, I like teams that get that scare in March Madness, because it seems like all of the champions are, they have one of those. A lot of them do. And boy, Florida certainly got a scare. Now, Dan Hurley, boy, he's on, according to script, there's no doubt, really had his team prepared and really was an a-hole after and how he handled it. So, no surprise with him. But UConn gave Florida all they could handle on Sunday morning. So Florida now is a 6.5-point favorite over Maryland. So both of these teams got scares. Of course, Maryland with the buzzer beater, with to beat Colorado State after they just hit that big rainbow three. But I think still this is the best roster in all of college basketball, and the most tested roster in all of college basketball. Duke looks good, but I just don't know the ACC and a couple of their opponents, 3 miles from campus where they played in Raleigh. I'm just wondering. They sure do look good. But Florida, size, athleticism, skill, and depth. And that's the thing that Maryland does not have. And I really wonder if they're going to get into it. I like how they performed and were very aggressive in clutch situations down the stretch of the last 3 minutes when the game was decided against UConn as well. And so I think they've had their scare. I think they'll get into Maryland's depth. I understand that Maryland's starting 5 averages the most points collectively in all of college basketball. Their starting 5 has more games where all 5 of them have scored in double digits. But their lack of depth, I think, will catch up with them. And I think Florida got that escape, and I think they roll. And I'm going to lay the 6.5 against the Terrapins here, Paul.
Yeah, Florida was my pre-tournament pick to cut down the nets in San Antonio on April 7th. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I think the Gators, they did have their close call. But as you pointed out, UConn the past couple of years, they pretty well steamrolled everybody. But that's the exception and not the rule. Like you mentioned, usually you're going to have at least one close call where you just escape. You can exhale and you move on down the road, and maybe you're better for it. Maybe you've got a little bit more of the players' attention, that type of thing, focus, and you get recommitted to the end goal. But Florida's, like you pointed out, I think they're the best roster in all of college basketball. They trailed for much of the second half yesterday before beating two-time defending champion UConn 77-75. And then, as you also pointed out, Maryland, I mean, what can you say? True freshman Derek Queen kisses it high off the glass with the left hand as time expires, and Maryland survives Colorado State 71-70. So both of these teams kind of have to feel like they got a second chance and a second life. But I just think if both of them bring their A game, I think Florida's A game is better than Maryland's. And as you also alluded to, Maryland's got a 7-man rotation. They are not deep at all, and their starting 5 plays a lot of points, a lot of contributions, but a lot of points. I just think Florida's the most well-rounded team. And when the game tips off, I might very well be with the Gators on you here laying the points.
All right, so that's my second pick on the Thursday card. The only card that we don't have a pick is Duke in Arizona. Right now at Bet Rivers, Duke is a 9-point favorite over Arizona. With Caleb Love, you're going to get. He had 10 points in the first game. Really wasn't tested that much in the first game, but 29 in a come-from-behind win against Oregon on Sunday night, the late game. So he's certainly capable. We know about that. But, boy, the betting public is just back Duke, and they are profiting every time, it seems. So both of the games in the NCAA tournament, first and second round, they won. And they covered, and they drove that line against Baylor all the way to a closing number at 12.5 and still covered comfortably. Duke and Arizona, Paul, the second game in New Jersey, 9-point favorite, a big number against Arizona.
Yeah, in my mind, going into the opening weekend of the tournament, the biggest question, tournament-wide, to me was, is Cooper Flagg fully healthy? And I think we saw in those two performances this past weekend that he is fully healthy, clicking on all cylinders. I wouldn't have had him in there the last couple of minutes yesterday, but, they did. And so I think his ankle's close to 100%, and he's playing at a high level. The Blue Devils in their first two games, I don't know what more they could have done. They beat Mount St. Mary's and Baylor, a pair of outclassed opponents, by a total of 67 points. Like you, I have a little bit of concern about their game in and game out caliber of competition in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Tyrese Proctor, last three games, he's hit 19 3-pointers. The 6'6" Australian sharpshooter, 19 of 30 from beyond the arc in the last three games. If he keeps shooting the ball like that, it's going to be hard for Florida or maybe even the Lakers to beat Duke. They might roll through it, but three-point shooting can come and go, but, man, he's been shooting the ball. I'm on the sideline on this game. And at that number of 9.5, I'll probably stay there.
All right, Friday, Michigan State and Ole Miss. So Michigan State, another team. How hot are they? They have won and covered 10 of their last 11. Just that game against Wisconsin in the Big Ten semifinals was the only one they've lost in this 11-game stretch. They covered barely, too, against New Mexico. Closed at 7.5. It fell 8 where they were. It was a lot of in-game support on them as well. So the books got beat with the pregame and also the in-game in that one. Ole Miss is hot. They shot 40% from three against North Carolina, built that big lead and held on. And then they followed up with a 58% three-point percentage against Iowa State, a more respected defensive team than North Carolina. So Chris Beard, him being in a Sweet 16, I know that doesn't surprise guys like you and me, Paul, but the Ole Miss has a lot of people a little bit surprised. And it's the shooting that has people. Man, the way they dismantled Iowa State as well. After coming out the first 5 minutes and struggling, Michigan State here, extremely public. Lately, they're laying 3 right now at Bet Rivers against Ole Miss. This game's in Atlanta.
Yeah, Chris Beard back in the Sweet 16, this time with the Ole Miss Rebels. I think it's safe to say that guy can coach a little basketball. But I think Ole Miss, I think they've had a fairly easy, or at least a fairly friendly, I should say, path to this point. First the Rebels defeated a North Carolina team that didn't belong in the field, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others. Then they play Iowa State. Iowa State's without their point guard, Keyshawn Gilbert. He was the team's second leading scorer at 13.4 points a game. Their assist leader at 4.1. A guy, just a full, well-rounded point guard, pitched in 3.5 rebounds, 1.7 steals a game, a solid defensive presence on the perimeter. So that was a big loss for them. Counting the loss yesterday to Ole Miss, Iowa State in the 6 games they played this year without Gilbert, only 2-4. And one of those victories was in the opening round of the tournament against an outmanned Lipscomb team. So they were not the same team without Gilbert. 3-point shooting, again, can be fickle. It can come and go. Ole Miss obviously shoots it well at times. But yesterday, they're 11 of 19, as you mentioned, from beyond the arc in that 91-78 victory over Iowa State. And Michigan State, they just happened to lead the nation in 3-point defense. They allowed just 27.8%, so almost 28% from 3-point land. So I don't see Ole Miss hitting 11 3-pointers against Michigan State. I still think Michigan State has a chance to emerge out of the South and earn a trip to San Antonio. This Michigan State, like several teams in the tournament, as you might expect, on a tremendous roll at the present. They've not only won 10 of their last 11 games, they've covered 10 of their last 11 games. I think they make it 11 out of 12 on both fronts. I like Michigan State minus the 3 over Ole Miss.
All right, let's move on to this all SEC Sweet 16 matchup in Indianapolis between Kentucky and Tennessee. And a lot of times, and there's a lot of back and forth. You play a team for the third time, and if you've swept them and things like that. Well, usually the team that has won the first two when you've played the third time is the superior team, the better team. It's not the case. Tennessee is the 2 seed. Kentucky's a 3 seed, but not just that, but the individual numbers. When Kentucky beat Tennessee in Knoxville, and they were without Lamont Butler, they were 10.5-point dogs. When they beat Tennessee at Rupp Arena in Lexington, they were 3.5-point dogs. And the double revenge spot is real, and I kind of, even though the numbers don't always equate, I do kind of like that double revenge spot. It's human nature. If you're just not going to respect the team that you've beaten a couple of times as much as if you say you lost to them. But this matchup, and when I watch these games, these weren't flukes. This was, Kentucky for most of the games, had it just kind of controlled the game. So Kentucky, I'm going more with this the matchup, and it's strength against strength. Kentucky's offense against Tennessee's defense, and then weakness against weakness, Tennessee's offense against Kentucky's defense. And it seems like when Kentucky was popping, it's harder for Tennessee to keep up that scoring strength. And there's some guys on Tennessee's team that are a little overrated defensively as well. I think they're really good defensively. It's individually not the case. 4.5, I think this line should be closer to pick 'em, Paul. I'm going to take the Cats at plus 4.5 in Indianapolis against Tennessee.
Yeah, I know a guy who's got a database that really can do a lot of interesting queries, and I would be interested to see it. Probably, it's a small sample size, even over the course of, past 25 years probably, but I would love to see a team that defeated, Team A defeats Team B as the betting underdog 2 times. Now they play them a third time, again as the betting underdog. How does that third game show up against the spread? That would be interesting. But you mentioned they went on the road outright as a 10.5-point road underdog. They went at home outright as a 3.5-point home underdog. So they've had Tennessee's number. What's interesting about this, and what I looked at, was 3-point shooting in those first 2 meetings. And Kentucky, clearly a better 3-point shooting team than Tennessee. But Kentucky, they were 12 of 24 from beyond the arc in both of the previous meetings. So Kentucky from 3-point land against Tennessee, 24 of 48. On the other sideline, Tennessee only 14 of 63. So that's a pretty big disparity there in 3-point shooting for the season. Tennessee, actually a good 3-point defensive team, ranked 3rd nationally. Their opponents shoot a little over 28%. But, again, Kentucky's got to have confidence. They're getting some points. I tend to look at, teams getting points as well. And the job that Mark Pope has done there in Lexington with an entirely new roster and coming in, and I don't think I'm not as close to it as you are, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't the first choice of most of Big Blue Nation there. But he's just handled it so well. He's put it together. It's meshed. And the 3-point shooter yesterday, I'm going blank on his name. The guy, he shot lights out yesterday, one of their 3-point shooters. But, as long as they're shooting that 3-point pointer with some proficiency, they're tough to beat. So I might join you at some point. Right now, I'm not involved, but certainly can see taking the points with Kentucky there.
Yeah, Butler was, from 3-point range yesterday. Bray was 3 for 8. Butler was 2 of 3. So they were really sharp again, and that was not quite as high scoring as a lot of people thought with Illinois and Kentucky. But this was a no contest. Illinois was getting a lot of public support in this game. They went off the favorite yesterday, went up to 2.5 that Kentucky was catching, but from jump, Kentucky controlled that game against the Fighting Illini, and kind of finishes off an underachieving season for a team that a lot of people respected their roster. Let's move on to another game in Indianapolis, and that's Purdue and Houston. In-state team here. Purdue going to get a nice crowd against the number 1 seeded Houston Cougars. A lot of people were betting on Gonzaga in that game, and Houston that was a disappointing non-cover if you had the Cougars. They would win about 10-12 most of the game, and then wanted to try and pull it out and run some clock, and then next thing you know, Gonzaga's got a chance. Purdue was leaking oil coming into the tournament. losers of 6 of 9 when you combine the last few games of the regular season in their loss to Michigan in the Big Ten tournament. And the thing is, what I like about Purdue is there's a lot of similarities athletically, defensively, that McNeese State brings to the table that Houston does. And they can unnerve a team. And, man, Purdue's execution was such a high level. McNeese State against Purdue with plus a 7.5 was a very public pick also. But, I mean, their execution, they were getting clean looks, easy buckets, and they made this – they put this thing away very, very early against a team in McNeese State and never let their kind of bullying and their kind of their toughness and aggression never became a factor in the game on Saturday afternoon. Similar to Houston can intimidate you. And so, man, if there was ever a better lead-in to prepare for all of Houston's defensive pressure, McNeese State's about as good of a comp as you can find, and Purdue handled it easily. Purdue also covered against High Point, and that one where High Point was getting a lot of public support as well. So the Houston Cougars are laying 8 here to Purdue in state, Paul. You like the Boilers here.
Yeah, I tell you, the Houston Cougars, they deservedly got one of the NCAA tournament's 4 number 1 seeds. They're assigned to the Midwest region. The Cougars take care of business, their first 2 games. As you mentioned, holding off Gonzaga on Saturday, 81-76. So how does top-seeded Houston get rewarded for winning their first 2 games of the tournament as a number 1 seed? Well, they get to play Purdue Friday night in Indianapolis at Lucas Oil Stadium, only 70 miles from Purdue's campus there in West Lafayette, Indiana. So I know Kelvin Sampson probably has some choice words for that assignment. And he saw the bracket when it came out and knew this was a possibility. Friday's contest, in my mind, it equates to a quasi-home game for the Boilermakers. They're going to have a significant crowd advantage, going to be loud. It's going to be partisan. Purdue, to be fair, they're not quite to the level, I don't think, anyone would dispute, to the level of last year's national finalists that fell to UConn 75-60 in the national championship game. But the Boilers, they certainly have some capable players. And first and foremost, led by all Big Ten Player of the Year, Braden Smith. Guy doesn't look like a big-time basketball player to many of us, but he can play. 16 points a game, 4.5 rebounds, led the conference in assists at 8.5 assists. And you talk about a guy taking care of the ball, distributing the ball, his assist to turnover ratio, almost 3-1. So that guy's a jewel with the basketball. While some in the past may have argued that Houston lacked adequate offensive scoring options to perhaps hoist the banner at the end of the season and win it all, this year's team's a little bit different. They have a deeper pool of scorers. They've got 4 players who essentially average 11 points a game or more. But still, I made this number more in the 6.5 or 7 point range. I really put a little bit of stock, or quite a bit of stock, in that quasi-home court advantage for Purdue. I like the Boilermakers plus the points over the Cougars.
All right, that's it for our picks. But one more game that we don't have a real play on, but we'll certainly break it down real quick, and that is Auburn against Michigan. And I'm one of those, you can count me in as far as a non-believer, or just when is it going to catch up with the Michigan Wolverines? Man, they lost 3 in a row to end the regular season heading into the Big Ten tournament, and then they win 3 there, and of course their first 2 in the NCAA tournament. And it seems like, let's go in reverse order. They're down double digits in the second half to Texas A&M. They turned it into a double-digit win. They're down 2 with 2.5 minutes to go against the Tritons of University of Cal San Diego. They come back and win. They're down double digits to Wisconsin with 13 minutes to go in the Big Ten final. They do that. They're down with 5 seconds to go and go coast to coast against a tough Terrapin defense at the end of the game for a layup to win that one. I mean, it's been close win after close win. At some point, you got to say the team is pretty clutch. The other thing is, it seems like Dusty May has kind of calmed down Wolf, the 7-foot transfer from Yale, as far as the point forward, so to speak, the primary ball handler who makes some some nice highlight passes, but can be a turnover machine as well. He's kind of calmed him down in limiting both the assist and the turnover ratio numbers. So kind of just neutralizing him quite as much. It looked like he was just letting him roll. Like it was kind of clumsy for a big part of the season. Auburn, on the other hand, they got guys that got cramped up a little bit. Well, man, their guards were really good. The five-star freshman Pettiford was outstanding against Creighton, man. Had like 23. What he and Denver Jones combined for 38 in a win against Creighton, where they were down at halftime in that game. It's a little bit more than 70 miles, but not more, about 100 miles from Auburn's campus to Atlanta, Georgia. So their crowd's been traveling a lot in that one. So Auburn 8.5, 152.5 over the Michigan Wolverines.
Yeah, and talking about this game, I want to make a quick point, and it is somewhat opinion, but using KenPom and another power ranking source that I use that's pretty accurate on projecting point spreads, despite being the tournament's overall number one seed as of today, I'm fairly confident, a relatively high degree of confidence in saying that Auburn would not only be a small underdog to Duke as of today, they would be a small underdog to Florida and might even be an underdog against Houston, probably be pick against Houston. So I don't really agree. This is a great Auburn team, and Broome, obviously, an exceptional talent. But I don't agree with Bruce Pearl's assessment a few weeks ago that Auburn ranks as one of the best teams in the history of college basketball. You know, I know recency bias is real, and folks, get caught up in it. And when you combine it with partisanship, it can cause sports fans and coaches to make outlandish stadiums. Neither here nor there, but, Michigan, as you indicated, they've just been a survivor of close contest after close contest. I don't know how many games they've won by 4 or fewer points in this calendar year, but it's been more than a half dozen. It seemed like every victory is by 4 or more. And against Texas A&M, it just seemed methodical that they were just going to be behind by double digits. A&M was going to be in front most of the game and just kind of coast to victory. And then out of nowhere in the second half, they post this huge run, and the final score is certainly not indicative of the way the game was played. So they don't knock you out of your chair with their game-to-game performance, but their body of work, speaks for itself. Danny Wolf is, he can be a little bit erratic, but man, there's not too many 7-foot guys for people who hadn't seen him that can handle the ball the way he does and distribute. He's a unique type player. Michigan, they obviously won the Big Ten tournament off of that losing streak you were talking about. 7-2 on the season as the betting underdog. Right now, I don't have a play, but if it gets to, if it goes up a little bit, if it gets to 9, I think I'll buy it on Michigan and take the points.
Yeah, you wonder if Auburn just peaked a little too early because this is a historically strong season for the SEC, and they won it with two games remaining on the schedule outright. They won the championship. They got more quad one wins than anybody can remember, and then they're just kind of limping. Down the stretch a little bit. You wonder if there's just a little bit time. But man, when those guards play like that, Broome can play. Baker Mazara got to keep his head straight, but he's been ejected and gets his fair share of technical fouls. But I don't know. It's a capable team. We do know that, and so. But then they lose at home to Alabama, which really did surprise me. Baker Mazara got kicked out of that game as well. So the resume, a lot of ways, is unbelievable. But is their form, where it should be? Have they been at better form over the course of the season? I can listen to an argument for that as well. We'll be back next week as far as the Final Four. When we preview that. Good luck on the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 this weekend. For Paul Stone, I'm Jimmy Yott here on the Sports Bettor's Paradise on the Bet Rivers Network.
Thanks for watching College Sports Rushes, Sports Bettor's Paradise on the Bet Rivers Network.